We deal as equals by mutual consent to mutual advantage, and I'm proud of every penny I've earned in this manner. I refuse to apologize for my ability, and I refuse to apologize for my success. I refuse to apologize for my money. If you ask me to name the proudest distinction of Americans, I would choose the fact that they were the people who created the phrase to make money. Welcome, everyone, to the Ethics and Economics of Profit. Don't let your eyes glaze over. It is profit. Sounds like business. Sounds like P&L statements. There'll be a little of that. This is going to be partly economics, partly philosophy and ethics, a little bit of politics, not much. What do you think of this? A student actually beforehand told me, this is on the door outside his professor's office. Sitting around a campfire, looks like the civilization is in ruins behind them, and someone says, yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. What does that mean? Doesn't sound good. So my first question is, what is a shareholder? What are shareholders? After all, they destroyed the planet. Presumably, in some future, we need to know who these monsters are. These destroyers, shareholders. By the way, notice it also does say, if you look closely, a time when we created a lot of value for shareholders. The shareholders didn't create the value. It was created for them by, who's we? Society, or these four people? Probably not these four people, but there's a lot in one comic frame. There's a lot in there. Someone is destroying the planet. There's something and they're called shareholders, and they don't really make value. Somebody else makes it for them. Then they destroy the planet. Not very grateful people, whoever these are. Oh, look, there's a president who says the same thing. He doesn't say they destroy the planet, but sometimes he does. Quote, this is before he got elected. Biden, it's way past time we put an end to the idea, or the era, I should say, of shareholder capitalism. It relates to capitalism. The idea that the only responsibility a corporation has is with shareholders. That's simply not true. It's an absolute farce. They have a responsibility, shareholders do, to their workers, their community, their country. It's getting very collectivist here. That's not a new or radical notion, unquote. Actually, it's not a new or radical notion because it was very popular, guess when? In the 30s. It's called corporatism. Very popular in Italy under Mussolini, very popular in Hitler's Germany. The idea that we're talking here about corporations. Then the shareholders own the corporation. That's who these dastardly shareholders are. They own companies. They have a share in companies. They own common stock. Because they put their money in the company. They bought the company. So the share just represents their ownership stake. Why would they be dastardly? The owners of the means of production are demonized? I wonder who came up with that idea. And so let's dig a little deeper. You know, if you just go to the etymology of it, always go to the root. Remember I did that with capitalism? Where does the word capitalism come from? Cap, head, system of the head, system of the mind. This, to me, I don't know about you, this is straight off this is a very good site, Etymology Online. Pump in any word and see what the origins are. So here we're talking 14th century, but look at all the nice words. It means benefit. This is old French, this is all different. It means growth, advance, these are in quotes. Increase, success, progress, useful, do good, forward, accomplish, gain, usefulness, not useless, nothing in there about parasites or blood-sucking, planet-destroying. I haven't yet connected shareholder and profit, but the lecture is about profit, so I'll bring it back together eventually. I just want to give you the background here. Based on this alone, you would not think that there's much of a controversy about, or should be about, profit, other than people should be for it. The more the better of all these things if you're really a humanist and care about human well-being, surviving and thriving. Well, here's what I'm going to do. Seems like a lot, but it is the economics and ethics of profit. It has basically 4 points in each area. Profit is the net production of wealth. That alone seems innocuous, but it doesn't seem obvious either. What do you mean? Why do we have a different word for profit if all it is production? The key here is net. We'll see later, net production. But as such, if you're against if this is true, if you're against profit, you're against production of wealth. You're literally against producing things. That will be obvious more as I go through it. Now, the rate of profit, a little math here, which I'll also define for you. It's a percentage. It's like an interest rate. Is beyond the interest rates, probably the most important price in a market system. Why? Because it guides business managers as to how to run their businesses. It's an objective, anchored measure of success or failure. The higher that rate, the better. All else equal, risk and everything. And it's also a guide for outsiders considering to invest in a company. If it has a high rate of profit or a high rate of return on capital, money will flow into that. If it's got a low one, it'll flow out of that. See the mechanism? But totally based on self-interest, by the way. You want to maximize your returns. You'd rather earn 15% than 3%. And you'd rather earn 3% than lose money. We're already beginning to see the ethics of this, but that's the economics of it. How about this? Profit is unique to the private property capitalist system. Because if you don't have private property, you can't really have ownership of capital. You're not going to have all the things that flow out of that, like shareholders. Like in socialism, who's the shareholder? Anyone? Notice I didn't use plural. There's a singular shareholder. The state. That's the whole point of the state will own the means of production. There's only one state. The Russians, the Soviet state, or the Nazi state. They own everything. So there's not a group of companies. They do different things, the sectors, but now, and what about this one? Again, I'm just giving summaries here. I'll get into it more. Profit is created and produced by capitalists. Who are they? I'll elaborate as I go, but they are the shareholders. It's another word for capitalist. We're going to distinguish entrepreneur, business manager, CEO, all these terms out there that people have, they jumble them in their heads, they're all together. No, the capitalist is the owner of capital. In this case, the owner of a company. I mean, you can own a machine, but when you own a company, you're called a shareholder. And that's what capitalists own. They own the enterprise. All right, a little bit of the ethics of it. Here's the most important point. The profit motive is rational self-interest manifested commercially. That's it. It's the commercial version of rational self-interest. There is such a thing as the profit motive. They don't just talk about profit. Talk about the profit motive. There is such a thing. It's a desire to gain. It's a desire to add value and create wealth for selfish reasons. So I'll explore this a little bit more, but you can see the tie to underlying ethic. If you have an ethic that respects, appreciates the pursuit of rational self-interest in all aspects of life, well, this aspect is commercial, and it's just called the profit motive. A profit is made by the consistent practices of key virtues, not just any virtues. Not, for example, faith, hope, and charity. Those don't work. Not in business. Reason, facts, profit. Not faith, hope, and charity. And profit, we already saw just etymologically, but to expand on it, entails gain, progress, prosperity, well-being, happiness. And the ethical counterpart to the economic point, if profit is created and produced by capitalists on the ethical side, profit is justly earned by capitalists. And you have to be convinced of the first one, right? To see that the second follows. But notice these are two slightly different points. Profit made possible by the practice of key virtues. The capitalists and all his helpers have to practice key virtues. Rationality, honesty, integrity, productivity, productiveness, justice. But then this issue of justice, the sub-issue of justice is, well, at the end of the day, once we understand what this profit thing is, do the makers of it actually earn it? Or is it just, well, what would the options be? Luck. It's just luck. It's not really a theory, is it? It's a theory that I have no theory. It's causeless, so I'll attribute it to luck. And losses would be bad luck. So setting that aside, there are other theories that I'll go through counter to this. Now, what about, before I dig into what profits are and where they come from, look at these attitudes. This isn't, by the way, just a one-off. This is a survey of people, and they've asked them things about profit. And notice this is just a kind of summary from 2017, but it's called Anti-Profit Beliefs, How People Neglect the Societal Benefits of Profit. By the way, just think of that title, The Societal Benefits of Profit. Notice it's away from the self and the earned of who earned it, and it's like, well, it has societal benefits. So even that is like a kind of a collectivist, a collectivist altruist justification for profit. So even when you get someone, and these authors are, kind of respectful of profits, they're unwilling to say, profits are egoistic. They're moral because they're egoistic, because they don't consider egoism moral. So the best they can do is, please let us profit so we can help society. But even here they're finding people don't even believe that. Wow, we're far away from rational respect for profit. Profit-seeking firms are stereotypically depicted as immoral and harmful to society. I'm summarizing here. Now get this. At the same time, profit-driven enterprise has contributed immensely to human prosperity. That's a conflict. It contributes to human prosperity, and people think it's immoral. They either think prosperity is immoral, or, you figure it out. How can you keep two contradictory views in your head? Well, it sounds like the moral and the practical, doesn't it? It's very practical. Yeah, business stays in business if it's profitable. It's immoral. If we could only ask them to be moral, then they wouldn't be practical and we wouldn't be able to live. Quote, people see business profits as necessarily in conflict with social good. A view we call anti-profit beliefs. There's a bunch of studies in here. Study 4 shows that increasing harm to society is viewed as a strategy. It's a business strategy for increasing a hypothetical firm's long-term profitability. So they'll give them cases like, would a company cheat, steal, industrial estimate, if it would help them boost profits? Most everyone said yes, they would do that. And by the way, if you think profit is dubious, morally ethical, that it's theft, and then someone says, how do you think you thieve? By lying, cheating, stealing, and thieving. So if you start with, that's what the thing is, it's loot. How do people get it? By acting like looters, by acting like bank robbers. Together, these results suggest that the default view of profits is zero sum. We'll talk about that a little bit. The zero sum premise. So you got two things going on here. Anti-profit beliefs, zero sum premise. Oh, by the way, see this line? I didn't highlight it, but I love this line. Accordingly, people's stereotypes of profit-seeking firms are excessively negative, unquote. Just excessively negative. It would be much better if they were kind of negative. But just don't go excessively negative. Positive isn't even on the radar. That's not even, okay. It's just, you really seriously, aggressively negative or excessively so, or... Well, this is zero. What is zero sum? Anyone have ever heard of the zero sum principle, or negative sum, or positive sum? Anyone? Professor Biondi.
Means in order for me to profit, you must lose.
Yeah. Profit or any kind of trade, any kind of gain. By the way, beyond economics. I don't know, suppose you gain friendship? I don't know, we would go that far, but some people might say that. The idea is, it's easily summed up as, is a trade between people or business transit win-win or win-lose or lose-win? See the idea? Win-win would be what? Mutual gain. John Stossel famously calls this the double thank you phenomenon. Did you ever experience the double thank you phenomenon? Do you know what it is? Notice this. Maybe you've done it. You go to the grocery store, you buy something, you check out, and the person says, if they're good service workers, thank you for shopping at Wegmans. And you say thank you. Double thank yous. It's on a one-way street. I got value, you got value. Thank you, thank you. It's very unique to a capitalist system. Very benevolent in a way. Like, it would be weird if someone said, thank you for shopping at Wegmans, and you said, you're welcome. You could say that. Sometimes I say that just to make them laugh. But that's mutual gain. The zero-sum view, though, is I gain 5 at the expense of someone else minus 5. See what I mean? I sacrifice them. I cheat them. I underpay them, whatever. That is called zero-sum thinking. And it's obvious. It's an assumption that human relations are antagonistic, right? That someone has to be sacrificed. You either sacrifice yourself for others or others sacrifice for you. Negative sum transactions, by the way, are when people get together and they both go negative. Anyway, that's not what markets and economists over the decades have learned. They've learned that it's mutually beneficial to trade. That's why they tend to be for free trade. That's why they tend to be liberals in the sense of allowing trade to occur. They understand and recognize, and this is mostly an Enlightenment phenomenon. It wasn't really dominant even in the ancient times when the philosophers were better. It definitely wasn't true in medieval times. The idea that you could have mutual gain and there wasn't going to be exploitation. But in a world where wealth is static and you didn't see any growth, remember that chart I showed you a couple days ago? It was a flat, 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 and then hockey stick. During the flat period, anyone had wealth you think must have stolen it from his neighbor. Because net, it doesn't go up. But then net, it went up. So someone thought, well, this can't all be stolen. It must have been created. And Adam Smith started saying, yeah, I wonder what causes the wealth of nations. It's obviously not theft. It's got to be the absence of theft. It's got to be property rights and liberalism. Anyway, a core proposition in economics, that is true in economics, good, thankfully, is that voluntary exchanges benefit both parties. And by the way, they don't have to benefit equally. A lot of people have that myth. Even if there is a recognition that there's mutual gain, people demand that each person get the same gain. Plus 5, plus 5. That's not true. That's not true of most relationships. But most people don't care. I buy the bread and I leave. I don't sit there and ask whether Wegmans made a 13% profit margin on it. I'm happy with the price I paid, right? So the gains, it's mutual gain. But it can definitely be mutual unequal gain. The point is it's a gain. We show that people often deny, this is another study, people deny the mutually beneficial nature of exchange and instead espouse the belief that one or both parties fail to benefit from the exchange. These studies revealed that win-win, that's what I said mutual gain was, right? Denial is pervasive. Why would it be pervasive? That's crazy. I shouldn't say crazy. It's actually philosophical. It's not psychological. People often make that mistake. The next time you hear someone say, that's crazy. No, it's not psychology. It's usually philosophy. Bad ideas. There are several potential psychological mechanisms underlying win-win. We won't go into that. But anyway, failing to observe that people do not arbitrarily enter into exchanges, that's interesting. They don't arbitrarily enter into exchanges. They voluntarily do, looking for gain. But the presumption of a lot of people is, no, they just go there. They're either forced to trade or they're arbitrarily involved in trade. They have no idea that they're being cheated. So you can see all the arguments. But the fact that there would be a widespread rejection of win-win is part of the animus against profit. More studies about anti-profit. Now get this one, quote, a sample of college students that indicates a strong negative view of corporate profits. Where'd they get that? They're just college students. They're just like fresh out of high school. Their parents are telling them that profits are nefarious. It resonates strongly among business students. What? I thought business students might be even more attuned to what's going on, but no, among business students. What are the business professors teaching them? The business students are prone to this view. A strong and growing dissatisfaction regarding corporate profits, specifically 72% of those surveyed believe that the strength of the United States is based on the success of corporate America. But 61% believe corporate America is too profitable. Once again, see the moral and practical conflict? They really do produce the goods. They're immoral. Or they produce too much profit. How can there be too much profit unless it's seen as theft or unfair gain? Because if it were seen as, in the way I'm saying it, and I'll show, it's the net production of wealth, animus toward that is either ignorance or just misanthropy. Like, well, I know it's contributing to prosperity. I don't like prosperity. Therefore, I'm not going to like profits. Look at the these results are puzzling, given the importance of corporate profits to U.S. firms and the economy. So the researchers know that corporate profits are legit in some way, obviously, and that it's important to prosperity. They just can't figure out why people hate them. It's puzzling. They need to go ask the psychologists, apparently. It's puzzling. I love this study by Brian Kaplan from 2002. Systematically, the general public is very ignorant about economics. So whatever the state of the economics profession is, whether they lean free market or not, that's one issue. But the other issue is, what do people actually believe about the economy? And the wide gap between them is amazing. And this is just a subset of the survey. This is like a 40-page, but it goes on forever. Well, 25. But I just picked out the one on profits. So here's the survey question. Now I'm going to read another list of reasons having to do with business that some people give for why the economy is not doing better. Is doing better than it is not doing better. If you think it's a major reason, raise your hand. Very high on the list is the variable called prof high, where people said, the economy's not performing well because business profits are too high. Because they're too high, not because they're too low. And right next to it, executives are paid too much. Too much profit, too much CEO pay, therefore the economy's doing badly. You might think it's the reverse. If profits are net production, you can't have the economy, production going down due to profits being too high. It would be that profits are gone or too low. These are just beliefs. These are just surveys. Oh, but on the other hand, if you don't make any money, we're very warm and fuzzy about you. That's what this shows. Non-profits are warm and fuzzy. They're loved. They're loved. They're not competent, though. So they ask people, you feel warm like good feelings toward these non-profit entities and their competence. And what's the conclusion? Consumers use warmth and competence, two fundamental dimensions that govern their judgments of people and form perceptions of firms. 3 experiments showed that consumers perceive nonprofit entities as being warmer than those cold, calculating for-profits, but as less competent. They don't make any money. You rely entirely on gifts from philanthropists. And you don't really run, the United Way isn't really run very well. But we love you. You're incompetent. You often waste contributions. But you're so lovable because you don't make any money. You just take. You don't make. You're takers, not makers. That's considered morally, I don't know if I'd say superior, but morally warm. Warm and fuzzy feelings about the nonprofits. Thoughts before I go on? Questions? Am I going too fast? All right, this is kind of negative, so here's some positive. In 1964, in the Objectivist Ethics, Ayn Rand identified the trader principle, which is really wonderful. It refutes the whole zero-sum, but there's a specific context in which win-win develops and is made possible. So I'll start with that one and then later go to Axelrod, but just to some excerpts here. She says, there's no conflict of interest among men who do not desire the unearned. Those who don't make sacrifices nor accept them. Those who deal with one another as traders, that's why it's called the trader's principle. Giving value for value. That's a little murky because it doesn't have to be equal value. It can be twice value for one value. It's not identical, so don't read it that way. The principle of trade is the only rational, ethical principle for all human relationships. All, beyond commercial too. Friends, romantic partners, all human relationships. Family is always hard. Personal and social, private and public, spiritual, material. It's the principle of justice. You see the ethics of this? She's talking about a trader. She's using economic terms, trader. But you bringing in ethics. He does not treat men as masters or slaves, but as independent equals. He deals with men by means of free, voluntary, unforced, uncoerced exchange. An exchange which benefits both parties. Win-win. By their own independent judgment. A trader does not expect to be paid for his defaults, only for his achievements. He doesn't switch to others the burden of his failures. Bank bailouts, TARP, 2008. And he does not mortgage his life into the bondage of the failures of others. Unquote. A social scientist in game theory in 1984, 20 years later, famously wrote this article. This is an academic journal article with a great title, The Emergence of Cooperation Among Egoists. Why would that hit the social scientist as odd? Because egoists are seen as rapacious exploiters of others. So why would there be cooperation, especially among egoists? Because they're both trying to eat each other's lunch, apparently. It's dog eat dog. How can these dogs get along with their tails wagging? Happiness. It's a famous study and has influenced game theory, thankfully. But look what he says. This article investigates the conditions under which cooperation will emerge in a world of egoists without central authority. That's interesting. Without anyone forcing them to do it. Without the government regulating them. How cooperation can emerge from a small cluster, even if it's a subset of a group. Like even if you're in a tribe. A small cluster of discriminating individuals, even when everyone else is using an antagonistic approach. I'm summarizing after this. Cooperators basically refuse to initiate harm. That's interesting. Ayn Rand said, don't initiate force. Give other people the benefit of the doubt. Start with a handshake, not a punch. That's what Axelrod found. Don't cheat. It's to your advantage. He's actually saying, no, it was a social science experiment. You're going to profit more if you're benevolent toward others and pacific in the sense of being peaceful and seeking for mutual advantage. And by the way, if you can't find it, you go your separate ways. You don't have to deal with people. That's one of the untold benefits of a free society. It's not like you have to deal with everybody. You can walk away. More good news. There are articles, as this Svanberg's, I think it's are really very good. So they're studying this. Is there such a thing as a good profit? Taking conventional ethics seriously. Now notice what they say here for the philosophers out there and the ethicists. In this paper, we'll show that if we take conventional ethics, not egoistic ethics, conventional ethics seriously, there's no moral justification for business profits. Wow. Where are they getting this? To show this, we explore 3 conventional ethical theories. Christian, Kantian, utilitarian. That really does cover the big part of the landscape. Is that fair to say, Professor? I mean, those 3. So you got 3 big moral codes available to you. None of them endorse profit. Wow. Wow. They essentially reject self-interest. Well, what did I say? If the profit motive is self-interest commercially manifested, you see why. If you're going to be against self-interest ethically, you're going to be against the profit motive commercially. We will concretize how the anti-egoist perspective expresses itself in business and business ethics. By the way, you see why business people themselves wouldn't be necessarily immune to this, even CEOs. They wouldn't necessarily be immune to this. They're not going to be pro-capitalist just because they're capitalists. See the difference? If you're a capitalist financially, like you're running a business or you own capital, it doesn't necessarily make you a capitalist ideologically. Also, 2 books highly recommended. This one has a back cover blurb from Professor Hicks and praising it, and I would too. This is one of the better books I've ever read on not only what are profits, but the moral case for profit and profit maximization by Robert White. I think he's a New Zealander. And this one by Jana Wosession. Jana taught at the business school at Calgary for many, many years, and she's written excellent books, and this is more of a how-to you give to a CEO. Rejecting the idea that the way you become profitable is by lying, cheating, stealing, cutting corners. Or, by the way, being short range, a very common view I won't address much here. The idea that profit is made as a fly-by-night operation, right? Versus the long-range view. Corporations are often accused of being quarterly focused and they don't care about the long term. And that's not true, but I don't have time to go into that in great detail. Now, if you just scour encyclopedias or just like backgrounders and, entries on profit. So here's an example of one. Here I just wanted to, I'm not going to read all this. Here I just wanted to point out how eclectic it can get. This description of profit is actually not bad up top, but then he gives you 5 sources of profit, some of them which make no sense. So it's become like a grab bag of, well, maybe it's caused by this, and maybe it's caused by that. And throw in this and throw in that. It's not very scientific. But this description isn't bad. Thoreau, by the way, taught at MIT. And importantly, MIT Sloan, which is a business school. So he was one of the better economists. He was Keynesian, but he was a good economist in the sense that he understood business, the point of business. So see what he says here, except for the last line, which is no good. In a capitalist society, profits and losses hold center stage? Yeah, they should. But of course, people are throwing tomatoes at profit on stage. Those who own firms, the capitalists, that's accurate. That's what a capitalist is. Choose managers. Yes, they choose managers to run their businesses. That's what CEOs are. And board of directors who organize production, yes, in efforts to maximize their income. Whose income? The capitalist income. That is an excellent opening line, actually. Very accurate. It's not the entrepreneur, certainly not the worker, so to speak. But then it says, their search for profits is guided by the famous invisible hand of capitalism. Okay, there's no invisible hand. It's just this mystical, I'm a CEO. Where are the profits? Oh, some hand is telling me where. It's ridiculous. They use their mind in their hands. That's Adam Smith's phrase, so that's not it. But here's the problem. Notice the 5 things. Capitalists earn a return. There's this causality here, right? What's the first one? They delay their own personal gratification. What does that mean? All that means is you save. You see, you have income. You could spend it all right now on pizza and beer. Done. Or you could look ahead a bit and say, I think I'll save some money. And have a longer term perspective. Now, you can do that all over the place. That's not what's unique. That's part of it, maybe. But that's unique to like saving. It's not really unique to that's how profits are made. Because lots of people can save and they have nothing to do with owning companies or profiting. But it does contribute to the idea, the good idea, that you're not going to be profitable unless you're long range. You cannot be a fly-by-night operator and expect to maximize profits. You won't. You might get profits for a weekend, and then you'll be discovered and you'll be out of business. That's not the way to... Notice the second one, takes risks. It's very common. Very common is someone will say, the source of profits is the willingness to bear risk. What does that even mean? That comes from Frank Knight, Chicago School of Economics, 1920s. We all assume risk. When you walk across the street, you're taking a risk, getting hit by a car. Insurance companies do take risks and manage risk and they make money doing it. So it's not that there's not such a thing as risk. It's not that it's not a commercial thing. But that isn't really, I would say, the essence of profiting either. So you see how it's become a grab bag? Now, number 3 is close. Ability. Yes, productive ability. Of who? We'll talk about that more. But third, he could say some profits are a return to organizational ability, enterprise, entrepreneurial energy. That is the core in all of this. That's the closest to the truth. The last 2 are completely Marxist. See why it's a grab bag? You can profit if you're a monopoly. You're the only provider of the product or service. So you can charge any damn thing you want and get a profit. There are almost no monopolies under capitalism. I can't think of a single one, actually. The closest was Alcoa in aluminum in the 40s, and its profit was normal in the sense of it was average. It wasn't like through the roof. And not because they were trust busted and not because they were regulated. So that is a kind of a Marxist myth. We could talk about it if you want. Same thing here, market imperfection. That comes from what's called the perfect competition model, which is taught in microeconomic courses all the time in business schools and actually undergrad as well, which if I have time, I'll summarize. But that model, and notice the ethical implications, perfect versus imperfect market. Perfect by what standard? And the standard is, all the companies have to be small. Did you ever hear this before? That's like a 7-point list of the perfect market is there's many buyers and sellers. There's absolutely no barriers to entry. Can't even have advertising, by the way, because the products are all the same. The products are homogenous. So there's no need to advertise because you're not trying to distinguish your product. I mean, they have this like laundry list of platonic preferences for, and the last one is there's no profits. That's actually in the list. The list is no profits. Or if you have profits, like temporary, very temporary because you created something. But after you make a profit, everybody comes in and copies what you did and takes your profits away. See the zero sum? The dog eat dog. It's a fixed chunk of meat that people are, no sense of create. Anyway, I give you that just because, wow, there's a lot of eclecticism too. All right, now, just little excerpts from weird people who are considered free market. Adam Smith, considered the first pro-capitalist, and he was the first political economist because he was systematic and wrote The Wealth of Nations. But look at his view of profit. You tell me where he thinks profit comes from. In all arts and manufactures, the greater part of the workmen, that's the laborer, stand in need of a master to advance them the materials of their work. In other words, the worker doesn't have materials, doesn't have tools or raw materials. He has to go to some building called a factory, and he's given these things, and he works. See the idea? Sounds like a normal case so far. But notice what Smith says. The master shares in the produce of their labor. Who's making all the goods? The laborer. Who's sharing? The master. The master's apparently not working. You notice that? Or in the value which it adds to the material on which it is bestowed, and in this share consists his profit. He's like extracting it from the laborer. How? This profit makes a deduction from the produce of labor. It's the produce of labor. And then someone deducts it. That's a source of profit. Taking it from someone who actually produced. And Smith says, labor produces wealth. Then what are these capitalists doing? They're white-collar workers, right? They're sitting in an office. They're not sweating. There's not dirt under their fingernails. They're not laboring. So why are they profiting? Because they took it from labor. How would you do this? It's not like you give them a paycheck and then go rob them in the alley afterwards. No, you just underpay them. You underpay them. If they should be paid $12 an hour, you just pay them $8 an hour. So that they have them put up with it. The value which the workmen add to the materials, therefore, resolves into two parts. One pays the wages of labor, and the other pays the profits of the employer. Unquote. Labor theory of value, by the way, is the idea that manual labor is, the quantity of it that goes into making things, is the source of value. Manual labor. But what about mental labor? What about skilled labor? More sophisticated labor, which we would think is more productive labor. No, Smith had the view that that is not productive labor. He recognized they were managers, but he didn't go there. That took a while later for someone to say, hey, there are entrepreneurs who are productive and adding value. Now here's John Stuart Mill, also considered a free market economist, 60 years later? 72 years later. Labor produces more than is required for its support. Laborers will, in addition to producing their own necessities and instruments, have a portion of their time remaining. Wow, this sounds like overtime. Really? Do I have to stay and work for the boss? To work for the capitalist. We thus see that profit arises from the productive power of labor. If the laborers of the country collectively produce 20% more than their wages, profits will be 20%. See where they think it comes from? This is not really a very good defense of capitalism, because the capitalist is seen as taking his income from labor. And these two guys just took that same theory, labor theory of value, and instead of being benign about it, like Mill and Smith, they said, this is terrible. This is theft. This is terrible and evil. It might produce the goods, but it's evil. So here's their theory, that profit is theft from labor, which was implied in Smith. They just say it explicitly. Smith told us that this is how wealth is created. We're just naming it. They're exploiting the workers. This is called the exploitation theory of profit. Where does it come from? You exploit labor by forcibly paying them less than they deserve, by deliberately, systematically underpaying them. And they have no choice because you're the only factory in town. That's the kind of argument you get. They don't have any choice. They have to obey. And Marx called it the system of wage slavery, mixing the feudalism slavery with the wage system of capitalism. I won't read all this, but what they do say is once we get rid of this and get rid of private property and factories and capitalists and money and prices, that all goes together. That all has to go. Of course, in the beginning, this can't be effected except by means of despotic inroads. Yeah, we're going to have to use some force, some despotism and tyranny to take this over on the rights of property and on the conditions of bourgeois, meaning capitalist production. By means of measures, therefore, which they appear economically insufficient and untenable. Yes, see the collapse of the Soviet Union. Socialism is kind of an untenable system for producing wealth, but let's do it anyway. Because it's unavoidable. This destruction we need to do, it's unavoidable as a means of entirely revolutionizing the mode of production. Unquote. Revolutionizing it or destroying it? Destroying the capitalist mode of production. So what is the socialist mode of production? It doesn't have profit. There's no profit and loss because there's no capitalist, because there's no private property, because there's no multiple employers of competition going on, because there's one owner. By the way, how would capitalism come to an end? by many ways, but mostly by violence. But related to the theory of profit, Marx said, remember the profit rate? He said the profit rate's going to fall to zero. Why would the profit rate fall to zero? We'll see in a minute whether it does. But here's the idea. Follow this. Profit is stolen from labor. It's not produced by the capitalist or by any entrepreneur. They're so greedy, they suck more and more out of what labor gets. Labor gets pissed off. Labor starts kind of recognizing this, and they get in a revolting mood. And they get ginned up by, anti-capitalist rhetoric. So they're told to, workers of the world unite. You have only your chains to lose. That's how the Communist Manifesto ends. They're imploring them to seize the means of production and basically kill and maim the capitalists. But it's because you can't get blood out of a rock. You can only get so much out of these laborers. And these greedy capitalists just keep taking and taking and taking. And eventually, it goes down to zero. They can't take anymore because they've so immiserated the workers. That's the theory. Here's the facts. That's the rate of profit. This dark line is a good measure of it. Look at 100 years. 100 years of the profit rate. What's the average profit rate? This is like profit on invested capital, which I'll show you in a minute what that is. It fluctuates, but do you see that going to zero? It doesn't go to zero. And during all this time, employment went up, up, up. Wages went up, up, up. How's that possible? Marx thought in zero-sum terms, wages down, profit up. The way to get your profit up is just underpay wages, underpay labor. No, it's actually the most profitable companies that hire the most people. Is that not obvious? The companies that go out of business aren't hiring. There isn't a conflict between making more money as profit and paying wages, paying people more in wages, because the whole thing is a productive enterprise, and it's a participatory system. It's not a dog-eat-dog system. It's not an exploitative system. And if you show this to a Marxist today and say, Marx said the rate of profit would go to zero, and then capitalism would end. How come it hasn't gone down to zero? You'll get 25 different evasive answers. But them's the facts, man. A little more. That perfect competition. Now, this is not labor theory of value. This is the group of economists who believe in perfect competition, which, as I told you, one of its requirements is that competition is so fierce that there's no profits left. So this isn't capitalists run out of making money because they've exploited the laborers to the point of exhaustion. Here is the theory that says, no, fierce competition will make it impossible for anyone to profit because anyone sees a profit, they'll just go and copy what the other person's doing and undercut them in price. And anyway, so the whole idea is competition. But it's definitely not a kind of competition that exists in the real world, because there aren't companies that make no money for long periods of time and survive. But you get the idea. So Ross, I'll skip Ross. He's saying what Knight does, more recently Knight. Profit is due to entrepreneurial uncertainty and ignorance. Would anyone describe Steve Jobs as he made the iPhone and his team made the iPhone and they made a fortune because they're ignorant and uncertain? It's just garbage. No, they were more certain and more knowledgeable about what had to be done than other people were. But see, his view is the more knowledgeable you get and the more certain you become, you seek out and copy what other people, it's a very second-handed type of theory, what other people are doing. And if you're a dolt and you can't do that, the others will make money. Not intellectual confidence. Here's some of the phrases I'm quoting. Profit arises from, this is what I counted in just one book, a famous book called Risk, Opportunity, and Profit. He started the Chicago School of Economics, by the way. He's the founder of it. The Milton Friedman School, the Free Market School of Economics. This is not an obscure character in the history of economic thought. He's a major figure. Profits are due to sheer accident, luck, gambling, intuitive judgments, that's feelings, unconscious inductions, subjective feelings, hunches, superstitions. These are just all through the book. The entrepreneur in his supposed control of production is relatively helpless as to what he'll produce. Helpless. Under perfect competition, he would, of course, be completely helpless. A mere automatic registrar of the choices of consumers. See the passivity? And this is not a creator, an initiator, and a disruptor. This is a next order, please. What do you want, dear consumer? A registrar of the choices of consumers, laborers, and property owners. Wow. Now here's the sad part. Even overtly pro-capitalist moderns in the Austrian school kind of endorse this view. It's very sad. Schumpeter, one of my favorites, who preceded Mises, very good on the entrepreneur usually, but on profit has the same kind of perfect competition view. Profit is, quote, a symptom of imperfection. The markets are imperfect. In markets and reflects a disequilibrium. Under normal conditions, production must flow essentially profitless when the economic system is in its most perfect state. There's just no companies that are standouts, that are big, that have economies of scale, that are so creative that they're increasing market share. No, those are all, he says, those things exist, but they're by definition imperfect. Problematic. And Mises says the same thing. Profits are never normal. They're not the normal condition. They're abnormal. Or should be. They appear only when there's a maladjustment in the economy, when there's a divergence between actual production and production as it should be. See the Platonic nature of this? What do you mean as it should be? They disappear as soon as the maladjustment is entirely removed. In the imaginary construction of an evenly rotating economy, woo! Talk about invisible hand. The imaginary construct, what is this? Fantasy land. There are no profits in his imagined world of perfection. No entrepreneurs, and no entrepreneurial profits and losses. The wheel turns spontaneously, as it were. That's my Joe Biden voice. Kerzner, who's also an Austrian economist, is probably the least impressive, and all he writes about is entrepreneurs. Profits result from entrepreneurial alertness, a propensity to sniff out opportunities, from anyone who simply notices that inputs can be obtained at a total outlay less than the outcome of revenues. Any profits that happen to be won by entrepreneurship cannot be construed as a marginal productivity return. They're not productive. That's not where their profits come from. This is what I call, this is more of a arbitrage type view of profit. That price is high, that price is low, I think I'll buy it and make the difference. They're not producing anything per se. They're just like in the marketplace, haggling and chiseling away at minor differences in prices. They're alert, they notice things, they sniff out. It sounds like a dog sniffing out something from a garbage pit. It's really a very low view of what profit makers do. All right, back to Business 101. Bill, this is what I said I would try to simplify. In a business setting, they have revenues minus costs. That's profit. That summary enough for you? There's lots that go into revenues, but that's selling stuff. You sell stuff to people at a price. You get revenues. But to sell that stuff, you had to have made it. That's what the expenses are. The expenses are sometimes called the costs. Well, you have to get materials. You have to pay labor. You have to pay interest to a banker if you borrow money. So unless the revenue exceeds the expenses, you know all this, right? You're not going to have the differential is called profit. So you want to be able to sell value more that exceeds what it takes you to make the sale. What if they were even, Steven? What if they were the same? You might as well be spinning your wheels. You did all this work, you made all this stuff, you sold it, but it took you the same amount of money to make that. You haven't net made anything. Not really, right? Because you've used up as much in resources as you sell. So that's what I mean about the net production. Profits are going to be the net production of wealth because this is the production of wealth, revenue, but the one below it is the using up of wealth. when you make a car, you use up the metal, the aluminum, the glass that goes into it. Those things don't exist anymore. They're in the car. Then you sell the car. And if you don't make a profit, you're not producing anything really. You did produce a car, but you understand, you forget the part you destroyed. That's what expenses are. Loss is obviously the other way around. The opposite of a profit is a loss. That's when your expenses exceed your revenues. And that would be the net destruction of wealth, not the net production of wealth. Now, I love this example from a woman who really influenced Ayn Rand a lot on economics. Economics at this time in the 40s or so, Ayn Rand was still studying capitalism as an economic system. She wasn't entirely clear about how it worked. Shoshana Milgram or Shoshana Knapp has shown this in recent essays. I give you the potatoes because you know how you can put a potato in the ground and get potatoes? So it's a good way of demonstrating what profit is. Because potatoes are definitely production, right? And we can use them to eat. So it captures the idea of input and output. So watch what Patterson says. This is brilliant. Production is profit. Production is profit. Notice how she starts? Not it comes from this, it goes to that. Production is profit. What's the logic? And profit is production. They're not merely related. They're the same thing. When a man plants potatoes, if he doesn't get back more than he put in, he produced nothing. Net, net. This would be obvious if he put a potato into the ground today and dug it up tomorrow. Wasting his time. It's actually net, net negative because you expended labor. But it's all the same if he plants one potato and gets only one potato as a crop. His labor is wasted. Then he must starve or somebody else must feed him if he has no reserve from the previous production. And now the idea is if you put in one potato and get 8 back, what's your profit? You put in 1 and you get 8. 7, the difference. If you put in 8 potatoes and got back 7, what's your profit? -1, there's no profit, there's a loss. See how when you really make it tangible, it's obvious. That profit, the extra, is the extra production, not used up in the process of production. The objection to profit would be as if a bystander, observing the planter digging his crop, should say, you put in only 1 potato and you're taking out 12. You must have taken them away from someone else. You must have stolen those potatoes. And of course, that's not true. Those extra potatoes cannot be yours by right, it's claimed. If profit is denounced, it must be assumed that running at a loss is admirable. On the contrary, that's what requires justification. Profit is self-justifying, unquote. Well, it's not quite self-justifying. It's not like it's self-evident truth. You do have to understand it. A lot of people don't understand it. That is a very simple way of thinking about it. And you can complexify it, of course, but that is why I mean profit is net production. And I got it from Isabel Patterson. I hadn't even thought of that until I read that book. It's from The God of the Machine. This is a little more technical, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but for those of you in business, you know that the way to maximize net profit or net production is make sure marginal revenues equal marginal costs. What's marginal? Every additional change in revenue would be adding to your profit, right? But also every additional increase in cost would be taking away from your profit. If you get to the point where they're both changing the same amount, your profit is 0. Stop. Stop what you're doing, go home and celebrate. Don't go into lost territory. Well, we saw these other ones. Other than motivated by self-interest, you hear this all the time. Profits aren't really moral, but they might be good for the economy and job creation, and maybe they stimulate the economy, and maybe they're good for social consumer welfare and social welfare. And maybe we should have state philanthropy and all. But notice those are collectivist, more altruist justifications. They're not self-interested, egoistic ones. That I'll skip. That's for the mathematicians. This is important. I'll just say briefly. Remember I said the rate of profit? This is the last mathematical thing I'll do. Remember I said the rate of profit is important? How do you calculate it? You get a profit over time. That's why it's called a flow concept. So I earned $100 in 2023. It's a dollar amount over time, right? But how did I get that? I invested capital, meaning I created a factory. And that's a stock in time, right? There's stock. It's a position in time. There's my factory. There's my machines. there's my employees, there's the raw materials, and all you do is calculate how much money did I make over the year divided by the value of the asset of the capital I own. Remember that chart I showed you that showed kind of 15%? That's what that is. That's how they calculate it. That rate of profit over time is about 15%. It's kind of an interesting principle in capitalism. But here's the key. If that's the average, there's going to be companies all over the place and industries and products, right? Some of them are like 30%, really profitable. And some of them are, I don't know, cigarettes or sugar or something, not so profitable. They're still profitable with like maybe 5% profit rate. What would happen to investors with capital waiting to invest? They'd put it into the 30%, wouldn't they? 30% is more than 15. They'd move it away from the lower returning company or sector or product, right? Does that sound right? The self-interest of it? But what would the numbers do? If you take money out of an industry, that means the denominator is going down. A low rate will become a higher rate. Same thing with a higher rate. If it's 30% and money flows into it, the rate's going to change. The rate's going to go down. So there's a uniformity of profit principle. There's a tendency for high profit rate sectors and companies to revert to the norm. Not to zero, said Marx. And the other way around, for money to come out of, to flow out of less profitable businesses and sectors. So it's a guidepost for investors. It's a guidepost for companies too. Companies look at this all the time. Are we making money or not? Especially compared to competitors. Are we making 15% or just 12, 9, 8? What's going wrong? Are we making more than 15%? So this is a kind of a price when you think about it. Profit, if you think about it, comes from prices, right? So if prices are legitimately established, if prices are objective, then the revenues are objective, because that's just price times units sold. But also the costs are. Costs are just another word for prices, the prices you pay for running your factory. So obviously the differential between the two is going to be objective as well, if the prices system is objective. All right, quickly, any questions on that? It's a bit technical. Some of this material is for seniors and, well, you're seniors and, you're freshmen, seniors, and juniors, right? College. Some of this has been shown to business students too, so they're used to this kind of language. Okay, a little more philosophical or understandable stuff to laymen. There are 4 types of labor. Start from the bottom. Well, everyone knows physical, muscular, the janitor. I don't even know if they have janitors anymore. The next level, though, is skilled. It's not all physical. It's you can operate a machine. You can operate capital. It's going to take some intelligence, some experience, some skill, some training. So it's still partly physical, but it's increasingly mental. And I pick out 2 mental categories. This one's analytic, administrative, managerial. These are people in accounting, sales. They're in business, the service. They're in business, and so they're not really sweating, and they're doing mental labor, accounting, finance. You see what they sometimes call middle managers. They're not running the place, but they're not janitors either. And then the top, what I call synthetic, not analytic, but synthetic. People who integrate things and see the big picture and have a business strategy. This is the C-suite. This is the CEOs and the CFOs and the strategists and the consultants, and they're brainiacs in a way. They're in the C-suite. And prescience, much more able to see, an accountant isn't really looking for what's going to happen in the phone market in the next year. But strategists and CEOs do that. So those types of labor, when you think about it, what does that even mean? That this involves more brains than brawn, and this involves more brawn than brains. It's a little of both in each, of course. You can't even be a janitor without thinking about some things. But now here's the key to my main point. If you take these types of labor, now I give you 5 main functions and what they're paid. Start from the bottom. Why do I call it a helper. And normally, if this was a lecture from an economist, you know what this would say? Laborers. I don't use laborers. Notice why I say, I use helper because they're all working. They're all laborers. It's very unfair to say, here's this group of laborers and then everyone else. Because certainly the CEO isn't working, isn't laboring. No, that's not true. They're laboring this way. That's how they're laboring. They're mentally laboring. Sometimes that's more exhausting than physical labor. So let's get away from this bias of, well, there's laborers and then there's capitalists who don't labor. That is a Marxist premise that biases the analysis. But now, what are these others? These are more familiar. Oh, by the way, what does a helper do? They don't own the company. They provide services. I'll work at this factory and help you make shoes. I'm helping. It's called the help. We usually think of them as maids and chambermaids, things like that, but it's a help. They're helping the owners and the brainiacs in the place produce. But they're not the main producers. And there's many more of them because most people are not brainiacs. Most people are just physically, moderate, mediocre. So they provide services and they get wages. So this is the name of income in capitalism. There's 5 names of income. What's next? Owners of real estate. They're called landlords. Could be commercial or residential. What do they get for income? Rent. They charge you rent. That's another source. So we got wages, we have rent. What is interest? A banker lends you money. What's his income? It's not called wages. It's not called rent. It's called interest. Citibank earns interest income. You pay them interest. Right? Now there's another one. There's an entrepreneur. Now notice it's not really a helper. This is an initiator, an active initiator and organizer of production, bringing together all the factors of production, calling up the banker, hiring the employees, writing out the job descriptions. The entrepreneur is doing a lot of stuff. But the entrepreneur doesn't own the company. I mean, he might own shares, but qua entrepreneur, he's not the owner. He's not technically the shareholder. He's the business person, but the most brilliant, group of them, the C-suite type stuff. So even in corporations, these are not just people who start small businesses. There are entrepreneurial types in big business. Not that many, but to the extent they're entrepreneurial, and they earn things like salary, and I wouldn't call it wages. I'd call it salary, bonuses, much more variable, much higher. I mean, the CEO is making millions. The helpers are making, $70,000 a year. Why? Because the entrepreneurs are stealing from down below? No, because they produce more and add more to the bottom line. Now, the last one of relevance to the lecture is, who's getting the profits? The profits go to the owners, to the shareholders, to the capitalist. And what are they providing? Not services of that kind, real estate savings initiative. They're providing capital. They're saying, I will let you use my assets. But by the way, I'm not just going to give it over and then leave. I'm going to hire managers or people who oversee the managers, board of trustees. I'm going to hire entrepreneurs. Does that take any judgment? It takes enormous judgment to be able to figure out who to hire to run your stuff. The idea that you're sitting back with a cigar like, okay, pay me the dividends, I don't have to think about it anymore, is ridiculous. People lose their shirts doing that. It's a much wider context for a capitalist to know what's going on. What industry, what business, what product should I, what's going to happen in the future? Janitors are not thinking of this. Here's another way of looking at it. Who are the contributors to production? Economists call these factors of production, but they're actual people who own things. And then here's what's interesting. You have to think of this as all of these incomes are people who own things and rent them. Isn't that weird? That's all it is. There are people, they own stuff and they rent it. And the rent is their income. So here's remember the helpers? I said, what do they own? They own themselves. We assume they're not slaves. They own themselves. They own their labor services, and they rent it out. They say to someone, pay me and I'll work for you for the next year. Okay, that's renting. You're not buying the labor, you're buying their services, right? And you pay them away and they get a wage. I already went through this, right? The landlord provides what? You need a building to work in. You need a land, or, we're not living in the clouds here. Pay him rent. So he owns the real estate. He rents it to people, and they pay him rent. The financier, the one who collects savings, he kind of on their behalf owns the savings. If he gives the savings to a business, you rent the savings. You basically are renting the money out. What's the cost? Interest. You're not paying me rent. You're paying me interest on the thing I lent you. See the idea? It's all in the concept of rent, which is weird. Only one of them is called rent. But you see my idea that that's what the income is. And then the entrepreneur, a different kind of labor, a higher level of labor. That's why I put it up here. But in effect, it's like this kind of labor. They're all laboring in some way. I maybe need a better word for that to distinguish it from the helper labor. And then finally, capitalist. What do they own? Capital, equipment, factories, patents, tools. That's what they own. And they could just sit there and leave it idle. But if they want to make money, they lend it to people. Now, by the way, how did they get that? They themselves made money at some point and saved it and invested, and that's why they own these things. They didn't steal it. They worked their way up. They might have even started as a helper, like Andrew Carnegie. Started by sweeping the floors, I think, of the steel mills, right? Something like that. So you save, you work your way up. Anyway, that's profit. So see all these, you've heard these before, but I don't think you've probably ever attached them to actual people and what they're doing and what they own. And by the way, remember I said before, it's unique to the capitalist system to have profit. Yeah, well, one word, own. Own? You mean property rights? If there's no protection of property rights, this middle column goes away. There's no private ownership, there's no protection of private property, there's no sanctity of contract, there's no exchanging between all these people, you wouldn't have it. So just the idea that, wow, people own stuff and rent it, and that's income. You have to have a reliable, protected ownership structure. Do I stop at 3, Bill? Is it? I stop at 3? Okay. Here's a quick graph. Look at this. Another lines that kind of go straight. What is this? This is 90 years chart. This is a remarkable chart because guess what it is? Economists totaled up all the income in the United States. Well, I just went through see all the income? Those are all the income. So imagine going through 90 years and saying, add up this and this and this and this. But it charts only this. Top and bottom. You ready? Just the top and bottom. As a share of all the income. Ready? Who gets the most? Who gets more than 50% of it? What does it say? You can't see the label?
Employee compensation.
Yes, which means this group in total gets 60%, 50 to 60% of all the national income. Why? Because there's so many of them. They're not making a fortune. There's just a lot of them making money, and I even hate to do this as a share because it suggests zero sum. What share of the pie are you getting? Understand, this is just percentages. If I charted what is the actual income doing over time, it's going up, 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 up. Here we're talking about, well, whose share of it? And it's remarkably stable. Remarkably stable, actually, isn't it? It almost sounds like it's a principle or a law of economics of some kind. Because the economy's changed a lot in 100 years, hasn't it? 90 years. And yet these shares are pretty much the same. And profits after tax, this is after the government comes in. So this is like what these people are making are what? It hovers between 5 and 10%. So I don't know if you just take it as 5, 55, 11 times, or the profit the capitalists make 1/10 in total. Of course, there are fewer of them making this. So yes, they're going to be wealthier. But when you back off and say, most people wouldn't guess this. Before I show this, I say to students, what share of national income do you think go to capitalists? They'll say 80%. And what part go to labor? 20%. Then you show them this, and it's like the complete reverse. And They're not quite sure why this happened. I wrote, oh God, this must have been 15 years ago, that profit constitutes net wealth, the creation of economic value in excess of that consumed in the process of production. This is just reiterating what I've said so far, and it's in the readings, so I'm not going to repeat it, but this is a good summary of what profit actually is. But this essay actually went through the whole history of profit theory. That was the point of the essay, from Adam Smith to now, and showed how bad they've been about profit. Notice, I said, for more than 2 centuries, economists have been at a loss to explain profit. That's crazy when you think about it. That's really amazing. The theories they've authored have neither conformed to the facts nor explained them. Profit has been falsely characterized as theft from manual laborers or from consumers. So you could also overcharge consumers. See, if you do both, you can really make a lot of money, they'll say. Underpay the workers, that's a cost. Overcharge the consumers, that's the revenues. None of that happens. It's a competitive situation. Or due to, quote, market power, due to market failure because the markets aren't perfect, or dumb luck, which would obviously undermine the desert argument. We've already seen the anti-profit belief. Look at this book. The corporation, the pathological pursuit of profit and power. They're pathological, these profiteers. What might explain it? Here's a nice essay, The Anti-Egoist Perspective in Business Ethics and its Anti-Business Manifestations. Very good article. See, it is going to the core of it, though. We have these anti-profit beliefs. Where are they coming from? It's partly the zero-sum view. It's partly the anti-egoism view. Does it make sense? If the profit motive is the commercial manifestation of self-interest, then it's going to be doubted as much as self-interest. The moral premises of contemporary business ethics, many business ethicists hold the conventional view that being moral is altruistic, self-sacrifice. And the altruistic perspective logically implies a negative valuation of self-interest and of the profit motive and of business. As a result, the prevailing attitude in mainstream business ethics is that without altruistic restraints, business people are inclined to lie, cheat, steal, not create, earn wealth. Leads to a prejudice against business. So that's kind of a summary of what we've been saying. Zero sum, egoism is terrible, a little bit of labor theory of value. There's some stuff here on entrepreneurship I'm going to skip. That's in my entrepreneur class. There have been advocates of the idea that there's a productive contribution by managers from the mental side, including Ayn Rand's view of the pyramid of ability, that those at the top contribute most to the value and those at the bottom contribute least per person. They're very inverting Marx, by the way, turning Marx on his head, because Marx said it was the other way around. In her novel, Atlas Shrugged, one of the great businessmen, Hank Rearden, who owned the company Rearden Metal and ran it, so he was both capitalist and entrepreneur, is on trial for succeeding too much, in fact. And this defense is interesting. I work for nothing, he says in his defense, but my own profit, which I make by selling a product they need to men who are willing and able to buy it. I don't sacrifice my interest to them, nor do they sacrifice theirs to me. We deal as equals by mutual consent to mutual advantage, and I'm proud of every penny I've earned in this manner. I refuse to apologize for my ability, and I refuse to apologize for my success. I refuse to apologize for my money. If you ask me to name the proudest distinction of Americans, I would choose the fact that they were the people who created the phrase to make money. To make money. Men had always thought of wealth as a static quantity, to be seized, begged, inherited, shared, looted, or obtained as a favor. And Americans were the first, maybe the British also, to first understand that wealth has to be created. The words to make money holds the essence of human morality. So it's not take, it's make. The judge says to him, Are we to understand, Mr. Reardon, that if the public deems it necessary to curtail your profits, you don't recognize the public interest right to do so? I love this. He said, well, yes, I do. The public can curtail my profits anytime it wishes by refusing to buy my product, unquote, unquote. Yes.
I have a question. That Irving's response to the judge actually helps crystallize a question I had in my mind about what you were saying about Frank Knight.
Yes.
I agree with some of your estimation of Knight's views about, you said he overblows like the role of uncertainty, etc.
Yeah.
I think you're right. But there was something in the latter part of the quotation from Knight that actually sounded a lot like this, what Rand calls in the essay, What is Capitalism? Market value or the socially objective value.
Right.
So even if you do, or thinking strategically and you think you have an amazing product and really value people, you could be wrong that they will think that's valuable to them, and so they might not buy it, or for irrational reasons boycott you, or whatever the reason is. And to that extent, I think Knight's second point in the quotation you had actually captures this. So so could you say a little bit more about why you were questioning Knight?
Because his emphasis is not on, it's not that the emphasis is on, profits come from omniscience, and Frank Knight is wrong because he emphasizes fallibility or uncertainty. So partly it's that, and it's just a very weak argument for profit to attribute it to lack of knowledge and lack of certainty, when actually, we even know in the case of the Reardon case, but it's true of all the great producers, is they get more certain and more confident in what they're doing, even to the point where no one else believes their metal will work, and some customers won't buy it, and they have to be convinced. So there's even a selling aspect going on. But no, I hear what you're saying. It's not that Reardon is working in a context where there's no uncertainty. It's that that's not the essence of creating wealth. It's pushing back on the darkness and the uncertainty and the grayness that allows for production and achievement, I would put it that way. Professor Hicks?
Following up on the Frank Knight type question. We didn't need to go to the text lines, but my reading of Frank Knight would tell someone that there's a risk to uncertainty. What the entrepreneur especially is adding is a willingness to bear the risk of it.
Yes, they do say that.
Right. So,
but that's
is that if there's lots of people who are risk averse, they're we do what it takes. The entrepreneur is the one who's willing to do. And so that's why I'm making the problem.
See, my point on the risk, it's not that there's not risk involved in everything, like walking across the street, but in the business context, to emphasize that, it's a derivative aspect. Because, put it this way, a big risk taker would be someone at, say, Vegas. They're just a speculator. They're just throwing the money. They're gambling, right? So it's not that. Frank Knight isn't saying, I'm not saying Frank Knight's saying that. And this truly risk-averse person won't even get off the couch. So they're not going to be a first prime mover in business either. The reason it's secondary is no one just bears risk out of context. They bear risk because they have a profit projection. So in business finance, it's often called, you've heard this, Bill, it's called risk-adjusted returns. I'm trying to maximize returns risk-adjusted. So you can get like high returns and they're volatile, they're all over the place. So you have to adjust them for the risk. So I think of these people who say the essence of profit is risk-bearing, drop the context of, well, it's important, it's worthwhile to bear more risk because you've already made the profit projection, which means that's the origin of the creation. The reason you bear risk is you've already got a business plan, a product, and you've made a judgment about whether that's going to work or not. If that's not around, who cares how much risk then now you either go to Vegas or you do nothing. It's a aspect to the decision, but it's so secondary. Secondary is not quite the word for it. It's so derivative of the profit proposition, so to speak, that it's not an explanation for profit. The only legitimacy of it, I think, would actually be if he applied it to the insurance industry. The insurance industry itself specializes in bearing risk, and then they price it with premiums, and they make money. managing risk. So it's not that businesses don't have risk, manage risk, but in terms of profit theory, that's what we're getting at here. Who has a profit theory? It's not a profit theory to say people who bear risk in business, that's who makes profit. That's nonsense. That's not a primary, if you will. I don't know if that makes sense. Yes, follow up? Yeah.
What all Frank Knight is saying is that willingness to bear risk and uncertainty is a necessary condition. Not that it's the essence.
Good. That's okay. Yeah, I like that. That's okay. Not sufficient.
At the tail end of the process, the profits are being made.
Yes.
And with that basket of profits sitting here, we're deciding who gets what.
Yes. Right.
And what we're saying is some of that profit, this payment for the person with bear risk.
Yes. Yeah.
So they did make a profit because they were contributing a necessary ingredient to the overall process.
Yeah, I'm not saying that risk bearing isn't part of the story, but it can't be the main part of the story. By the way, you remind me that notice no part of this lecture was the idea of profit and loss. It was mostly on what is profit, who makes it, is it legitimate, what are the ethical roots. One of the key features of this is it's called a profit and loss system. So it's not only the motivation to allocate money and pursue projects that have higher profit rates, it's to avoid massive errors, a massive misallocation of capital to losing areas. Socialism has no clue how to do this. So socialism fails not only because it abolishes all these institutions that make profit possible, and they don't have the profit motive and they don't have competition. It's also that they will spend years pouring money into something and they have no idea or don't care if it's a loss maker. Capitalism cuts that stuff off at the root. Because companies can fail and they will lose money, but they can't steal money. If they're losing money, they eventually have to file bankruptcy and they go out of existence and they're no part of the system anymore. By the way, the assets don't go out of existence. The whole point of Chapter 11 is the assets get dissipated and sold out and sold off to others who will use them profitably. So they don't even waste, the system doesn't even waste the existing capital that's in failed enterprises. They just reallocate it to different owners and business managers who know what to do with it. It's brilliant. But that loss thing as well, and that, by the way, if you intervene, if you have capitalism and it's pure, this is going to work very well. If you have socialism, it's a disaster, right? But what's the middle course? The middle would be tax the profit makers, so you're penalizing the producers, the net producers, right? And subsidize and bail out the losers. So the mixed system we have today mutes the signals. It not only lops off the best and the brightest and their success by taxing them or regulating them or trust busting them with their success. It also bails out banks that make bad loans. So it keeps in business companies that are destroying wealth. You see, that's a big problem from a mixed economy, which I didn't even go into. So I'll stop there. See how quickly I got to the end? Right on time.